A military jury at Fort Hood, Texas today sentenced Army Major Nidal Hasan to death for killing 13 people and wounding more than 30 in a 2009 attack. He could become the first American soldier to be executed since 1961.
August 2013, a military courtroom at Fort Hood, Texas. A man in Army fatigue sits in a wheelchair, paralyzed, expressionless, unbothered. 13 senior military officers stare back at him in silence. He had already told them everything they needed to know on the very first day of trial. The evidence will clearly show that I am the shooter. Not a confession forced out under pressure, not a breakdown, not remorse, a statement, delivered with the calm of a man who believed he had done nothing wrong. This man was not a criminal by background. He was an Army major, a psychiatrist, a doctor who had spent nearly 2 decades in uniform, trusted with the mental health of soldiers broken by war. He sat across from their deepest fears, their nightmares, their trauma. And then one November morning, he walked into a room full of those same soldiers, the people who had trusted him, and opened fire. This is the execution files. Before we go deeper into this story, if you believe the full picture matters, not just the verdict, subscribe to the execution files. We don't just cover the crime. We cover the warnings that were missed, the systems that failed, and the lives that paid the price. Hit that subscribe button. Let's begin. Nidal Malik Hasan was born on September 8, 1970, in Arlington, Virginia. The American-born son of Palestinian immigrants who had crossed an ocean searching for a better life. He grew up between two worlds, two cultures, two identities pulling in different directions. He chose America. He chose service. He chose medicine. He became an Army Medical Corps psychiatrist, an Army major who spent nearly 2 decades in uniform, educated, credentialed, and entrusted with something deeply sacred, the mental health of soldiers returning from the front lines of war. To those around him, he was the system working exactly as it should. But inside Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where Hasan spent 6 years as a medical intern and resident, something was quietly unraveling. Colleagues flagged his behavior. They described comments as anti-American. They raised concerns about his judgment, his performance, his state of mind. The concerns were heard, they were documented, and then they were set aside. Hasan grew increasingly isolated. When he listened daily to soldiers recount what they had seen and done in Afghanistan and Iraq, and what he heard didn't harden his commitment to the mission. It fractured it. He told family members he wanted out of the military. Nobody helped him leave. Nobody forced him out. And that is where the story truly begins. Not in a courtroom, not on a gurney, but in the silence of institutions that saw the warning signs and chose to look away. Between 2008 and 2009, Nidal Hasan was exchanging emails with Anwar al-Awlaki, a Yemen-based cleric with direct ties to al-Qaeda. The FBI knew. A joint terrorism task force had been monitoring al-Awlaki for years. They intercepted the emails. They opened an investigation. They looked at the man sending those messages, an active-duty U.S. assured Army psychiatrist with security clearance and access to one of the largest military bases in America, and they closed the file. It didn't stop there. Colleagues at Fort Hood watched Hasan's demeanor shift when al-Awlaki's name came up. His eyes lit up, one officer later recalled. He posted online under his own name, comparing suicide bombers to soldiers who fall on grenades, framing mass death as noble sacrifice. Every data point was visible. Every alarm was sounding. In May 2009, despite a poor performance evaluation from supervisors and medical faculty, despite the flagged comments, the monitored emails, the documented concerns, Nidal Hasan was promoted to major. 1 month later, he was transferred to Fort Hood, Texas. Then came the final days. 2 days before November 5th, Hasan gave away furniture from his apartment. He handed out copies of the Quran to neighbors. He told people he was being deployed. He appeared calm, relaxed. One officer who prayed with him that morning said he seemed completely at peace. He was not preparing for deployment. Every warning sign had been seen. Every red flag had been raised. The emails were read. The concerns were filed. The behavior was witnessed. And the system that was supposed to stop him looked at all of it, and handed him a promotion instead. 13 people would pay for that decision with their lives. November 5th, 2009, Fort Hood, Texas, 1:34 p.m. Nidal Hasan walked into the Soldier Readiness Processing Center, the place where soldiers receive medical evaluations before and after deployment, a room full of men and women preparing to serve, preparing to sacrifice, and doing exactly what their country asked of them. He was armed with a semi-automatic handgun. He did not target strangers. He did not walk in blindly. He specifically sought out uniformed soldiers, the same men and women who had sat across from him in therapy sessions, who had trusted him with their most broken moments, who had believed he was there to help them carry the weight of war. He opened fire. The room that had been filled with the quiet routine of military processing became, in seconds, something no one inside it would ever forget. Specialist Frederick Green was shot 12 times. 12 times. More than any other victim in that room. And yet, according to prosecutors, even as the bullets tore through him, Green moved toward the gunman. Not away. Toward. He died in what the prosecution would later describe as dynamic engagement. A soldier, even in his final moments, refusing to stop fighting. He left behind a wife and 2 daughters. Among the 13 who died that afternoon was a pregnant soldier, a mother, a life not yet born. When the gunfire finally stopped, 13 people were dead. 32 more were wounded. It was the deadliest mass shooting on an American military base in history, a record that should never have been possible to set. Responding police officers shot Hasan 4 times. He survived, but the bullets severed his spinal cord. The man who had walked into that building under his own power would never walk again. He would face justice in a wheelchair, stripped of everything the uniform had given him, every rank, every credential, every title, all of it gone. August 2013. 4 years after the attack, Nidal Hasan finally stood before a military court. He had insisted on representing himself. No attorney, no legal strategy, no attempt to build a defense. On the very first day, he stood before a panel of 13 senior military officers and spoke words that silenced the room. The evidence will clearly show that I am the shooter. He then sat down. Over the weeks that followed, he mounted virtually no defense. Instead, he told the court what he believed, that he had targeted American soldiers in order to protect Taliban militants in Afghanistan, that what he had done was not murder, that it was religious duty. The 13 senior military officers deliberated for less than 2 hours. Their verdict was unanimous. Their sentence was unanimous. Death. Hasan sat expressionless as it was read aloud, with no reaction, no outburst, no remorse. Just the same cold stillness he had carried into that courtroom from the very beginning. But then came a decision that ignited a fury all its own. The Pentagon officially classified the Fort Hood massacre as an act of workplace violence, not terrorism, not a radical attack on American service members. Workplace violence. Victims' families were devastated. Lawmakers were outraged. National security experts said it plainly. The classification obscured the truth of what had happened and denied the victims the full recognition they had earned with their lives. The Pentagon called this workplace violence. 13 soldiers killed by a man who said he did it to protect the Taliban, and it was classified as workplace violence. I want to know what you think. Was that the right call? You drop your answer in the comments. Let's talk about it. Following his sentencing, the military moved swiftly to erase every trace of the rank Nidal Hasan had carried for nearly 2 decades. He was stripped of his title, dismissed from the United States Army, every pay, every allowance, every benefit, forfeited. The man who had once been Major Nidal Hasan, Army psychiatrist, decorated officer, trusted physician, was now referred to by a single designation, Inmate Nidal Hasan. He was transferred to the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, military death row, to await execution. And then he started filing appeals. Over the years that followed, Hasan raised nearly a dozen complaints through the courts. He argued he had been wrongfully forced to shave his beard, a violation of his religious rights. He argued the court had erred in allowing him to represent himself. He challenged the constitutionality of his death sentence. Every court, every argument, every appeal, rejected. On March 31st, 2025, the United States Supreme Court declined to hear his case, the final door closing on more than a decade of legal attempts to escape the sentence he had earned. The Pentagon is now preparing to ask President Donald Trump to authorize the execution. If approved, it would be the first military execution carried out in the United States in over 60 years. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth left no room for ambiguity. He was, in his own words, 100% committed to ensuring the death penalty was carried out. No execution date has been set, but for the first time in over 15 years, the road is clear. And while the legal machinery moves forward, it is worth pausing, stepping back from the courtrooms, the appeals, the classifications, and the politics, and remembering why any of this matters. 13 people walked into the Soldier Readiness Processing Center on the morning of November 5, 2009. They were doing their jobs, serving their country, going through the quiet, ordinary routine of military life. None of them walked out. 32 more left that building carrying wounds, some visible, some buried so deep they may never fully surface. These were not statistics. They were not footnotes in a legal filing. They were people. Specialist Frederick Green was shot 12 times. 12. And still he moved toward the gunman. He died fighting. The way soldiers are trained to, the way no one should ever have to. He left behind a wife and 2 daughters who have lived every day since without him. Among the dead was a pregnant soldier, 2 lives taken with a single bullet. These families have waited over 15 years for a justice that still has no date attached to it, and many of them carry a wound that goes beyond grief. The knowledge that their loved ones, killed by a man who declared himself a soldier of a foreign ideology, were officially classified by their own government as victims of workplace violence, not terrorism, not a targeted attack on American service members. Workplace violence. That classification has never sat right, and for the families of the 13, it likely never will. The story of Nidal Malik Hasan is not a story about a man who appeared from nowhere. It is a story about a man who was visible, completely and undeniably visible, and was allowed to continue anyway. The emails were read, the comments were flagged, the concerns were documented. Colleagues watched his eyes light up at the teachings of a terrorist cleric. Supervisors gave him a poor performance evaluation, and then the United States Army promoted him. Radicalization does not always happen in secret. Sometimes it happens in plain sight, in offices, in inboxes, in therapy sessions, in staff meetings. And when institutions hesitate to act on what they see, out of bureaucracy, out of politics, out of fear of being wrong, the consequences are not paid by the institution. They are paid by the people inside the building when the door opens. In 2018, George Washington University's program on extremism published a landmark report on the Fort Hood attack. Its conclusion was stark and sobering. The attack was a harbinger, a preview of the slow, steady rise of lone actor terrorism on American soil. It forced intelligence and law enforcement communities to fundamentally re-examine everything they thought they knew about radicalization. 13 lives bought that lesson. What we must carry forward is this. Taking warning signs seriously is not overreaction. It is not discrimination. It is not paranoia. It is protection. When someone tells you, through their words, their associations, their behavior, who they are becoming, believe them. Report it. Escalate it. Because the alternative is a room full of soldiers who never made it home. If this story made you think, share it. These 13 names deserve to be remembered beyond a Pentagon classification. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the Execution Files, now is the time. Every week we bring you the stories that go deeper than the headlines. Subscribe, share. We'll see you in the next case. November 5th, 2009. A processing center, an ordinary Thursday afternoon. 13 people who never made it home. A doctor, trained to heal, who chose instead to destroy. The warnings were there. The system saw them and looked away. Somewhere in the files of the FBI, in the emails that were read and set aside, in the promotion paperwork signed in May 2009, the answer to how this could have been prevented already existed. It still does. For Specialist Frederick Green, for the pregnant soldier, for all 13, we remember them.